Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to be breaking down the incredibly intricate and constantly shifting alliances that are literally reshaping the Middle East and Eastern Europe as we speak. We're going to untangle this massive, modern web of geopolitical relationships by looking directly at the data and the historical context from our source briefings. We aren't here to take sides, we are just here to unpack the actual facts on the ground.
So let's kick things off with a question that might sound kind of crazy at first. How on earth do cheap drones flying over Ukraine connect to advanced missile defense systems popping up in the United Arab Emirates? I know, it sounds like the setup to some weird geopolitical riddle, but it actually reveals exactly how deeply interconnected these global events truly are. The conflict happening over in Eastern Europe is sending direct, undeniable shockwaves straight into the heart of the Middle East.
To make sense of all this, here's our roadmap for today. Section 1 explores Russia and Iran's evolution. Section 2 maps out the arming of Hezbollah via Syria. Section 3 defines why these nations are partners, not proxies. Section 4 examines how the Gulf states are reacting. And finally, Section 5 projects future Middle East alliances.
All right, diving right into Section 1, Russia and Iran's evolution, from suspicion to synergy.
If you look at this timeline, you'll quickly see that Russia and Iran are definitely not natural best friends. Honestly, back during the Soviet era, there was deep mutual suspicion. Khomeini basically viewed the USSR as an untrustworthy atheist state. Fast forward to the 1990s, and a financially desperate Russia was suddenly selling weapon designs to Iran just for quick cash. Then, in the 2000s, Putin pivoted to actively arming them. But you know what the real turning point was? Post-2022. Suddenly, a heavily isolated Russia found itself totally dependent on cheap, effective Iranian drones. The entire power dynamic basically flipped overnight.
So the huge takeaway here is that this is a marriage of convenience. There is absolutely no romance involved. It's a highly pragmatic, often bumpy partnership full of friction. I mean, they still bicker over the shared waters of the Caspian Sea, and Russia remains incredibly wary of Iran ever becoming a nuclear-armed state right on its doorstep. They cooperate because they absolutely have to, not because they actually like each other.
Which brings us to Section 2, arming Hezbollah via Syria, the smuggling hub.
Just trace this physical journey for a second. The expert briefings lay out this massive, wide-open weapon smuggling corridor that's been exploited heavily since 2011. It's basically a geopolitical highway. The route stretches out from Tehran, cuts straight through Iraq, crosses a ridiculously porous Syrian border, and then empties directly into Lebanon. Now, even though the Syrian regime has tried to crack down on this recently, that border is just way too porous to actually seal shut.
And that porous highway is exactly how Hezbollah managed to build up an unbelievably huge arsenal. Experts estimate it's anywhere from 150,000 to 200,000 rockets. But here is the real shocker, the Russian connection. See, during the Syrian war, Russian soldiers and Hezbollah fighters were literally fighting shoulder to shoulder. Because of that, a ton of the weapons sitting in southern Lebanon today are actually Russian-designed. We're talking everything from modern anti-aircraft systems to older Soviet-era gear that got pulled from black markets in places like Sudan and Libya.
Moving on to Section 3, partners, not proxies, defining the relationship.
You know, it is super tempting for people to just label Iran a Russian proxy, or vice versa. But doing that would just be wrong. A proxy requires heavy dependence and strict obedience to a patron state. These two, they are allies. It's a relationship based on mutual leverage, meaning neither one can simply force the other into submission.
To prove they are merely allies, you really just have to look at the friction between them. For instance, Russia withheld promised Su-35 stealth fighters from Iran, and they abstained from UN resolutions against Iran rather than using their veto power to protect them. On the flip side, when Russia asked Iran to transfer its enriched uranium to Moscow for safekeeping, Iran flat out refused. It was basically a hard no way, knowing they'd probably never see it again. There is zero trust there, and yet they heavily rely on one another for underground survival tactics, like dodging sanctions and smuggling oil.
Let's pivot to Section 4, the Gulf states react, a shift in defense.
To really grasp the stakes for the neighboring nations in all this, get a load of this chilling threat. According to diplomatic sources in the briefings, Iranian counterparts have explicitly told diplomats from nations like the UAE and Bahrain, quote, "We know where your glass towers are." Think about that. That is a direct, point-blank threat targeting the iconic, multi-billion-dollar economic hubs of Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Manama.
Now, while those specific glass towers haven't been leveled, Iranian-backed strikes absolutely have hit vital regional infrastructure, like Saudi oil fields. Driven by the pure necessity to protect their economies, these Gulf states are making some wild, unprecedented moves. Remember that crazy question we asked at the very beginning of this explainer? Well, here's your answer. Gulf states have been closely watching the conflict in Eastern Europe, and they've started buying up cheap, highly effective anti-drone tech developed by Ukraine. And even more astonishingly, breaking decades of historical precedent, the UAE has reportedly brought in Israeli Iron Dome defense batteries, complete with the personnel to operate them, because when your very survival is on the line, old regional rivalries go right out the window.
Which brings us to our final section: future Middle East alliances, pragmatic survival.
So if you're waiting for some unified Middle Eastern NATO to form, the experts say don't hold your breath. It's a total myth. Instead, we are seeing three very distinct camps forming out of pure cold pragmatism. First, you've got the UAE camp, which is doubling down on US and Israeli ties to build a modernized defense. Second, there's the nuclear umbrella camp. Nations like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey are reportedly seeking military ties with Pakistan to secure a nuclear deterrent. And finally, the hedging camp. Countries like Oman and Qatar are keeping their diplomatic channels open with Iran simply because geography forces them to. I mean, Qatar shares a massive natural gas field directly with Iran. They literally cannot afford to sever those ties.
So what is the crucial point to take away from this entire explainer? While the drones and proxy militias are obviously massive concerns, the ultimate existential fear driving all this frantic pragmatism is the looming threat of a nuclear-armed Iran. All these crazy new alliances we're seeing, from buying Iron Domes to courting Pakistani military support, are basically massive insurance policies against that specific terrifying reality.
I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. We've just traced how weapons flow all the way from Moscow to Tehran to Lebanon, and how the Gulf nations are frantically building shields in response. As the Middle East totally abandons its traditional norms and historical alliances just for the sake of sheer survival, what happens next? Will this giant complex web of defensive alliances actually succeed in containing the tension? Or are they inadvertently setting the stage for a much, much larger global conflict? Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.